Hello. Thank you for tuning in today. We are Sandra and Julie. We are a mother and daughter coaching team, and we work with professional women who are tired of feeling like their lives and businesses are chaotic and they need help. They need somebody to come in and help them clean it up and create a more fulfilling existence. And this is a podcast for those who are hungry to discover who they truly are and want to achieve their goals by exploring their life purpose and really expand their impact on the world. So here we talk about how to clear limitations, limiting beliefs, think beyond our conditioned minds, and really optimize our energy systems so we can thrive in business, in our relationships, in our health, really all areas of life. And today we're going to be talking about addiction, but also talking about habits, maybe unhelpful behaviors. And really we're diving into this because I've had some kind of recent reflections on my own relationship with alcohol and really just like where I am in my life and as compared to where I was 10 years ago. And my mother here has also been having some reflections about her own habits and substance use and things like that. So it's been something we've been talking about a lot together. And it's been a topic that's been coming up with some of our coaching clients and some of our friends as well. So we thought, you know what, let's just have a conversation about this here and dive in. So I'm just going to start off by saying, I don't feel like I've personally ever really struggled with addiction. But my relationship with alcohol has taken various forms over the course of my life. There have been phases of like a lot of indulgence, with, heavy drinking, or like when I was younger in college, there was a lot of partying. And then I've had years where, I've been more in motherhood and I've kind of almost stopped drinking entirely, or when I was pregnant, it was like a no-brainer and very easy for me to not have alcohol in my life. So I feel like I've been kind of very different places on the spectrum with it. However, as a bit of a lush and as a Taurus sun sign, I do have a tendency toward indulgence. Like I love to be wined and dined. I married a chef. And so I do have this kind of deep appreciation for like a really good glass of wine or a really well-crafted cocktail, or, the whole sensory experience that alcohol and food can kind of provide for you. So, there's part of me who's like really loves the artistry behind, alcohol and even food, because I think we'll talk about in a minute, like this isn't just talking about addictions with alcohol or drugs. It's like anything, it could be anything, right? But I also find myself throughout my whole life, I've been pretty easily swayed by the behaviors of those around me. So I've also had periods of time, like when I was coming out of high school and in college, I would say my first like really serious relationship, I lived with someone who was struggling with a drug addiction for 5 years. And I was in a relationship with that person. And so I really seen firsthand how it can impact you when you're in a relationship with that person, and also the impact that it has on the whole family unit and their lives. So, we're going to talk about addiction. I hate the like trigger warning, but it's like, I just want to say before we dive into this conversation, we are not experts on addiction at all. And if this is something you're struggling with, I highly recommend you seek the advice and help of a professional. We are not those people. This is just us sharing our own experience. And we're really going to be talking more about kind of habits and behaviors and how to change habits and behaviors, and not necessarily diving really far into this talk about how to, cure an addiction or treat an addiction. So I think, Mom, given all that, do you have anything to add to that, to what I've just said here?
Yeah, I think that we both have just been looking at our lives and looking at having more energy so we can run our business and be more in alignment with who we are and what our purpose is, which is really what we do with our clients. And it's just when you're starting to do that, you do start to look at the things that you're doing that may be getting in the way of that. And that's really where this conversation came from. And again, just like Julie said, we're not here to say it's bad to have these behaviors. We're just here to say that it's great to have awareness around why you're doing the things that you're doing. If that's, if you're a wine connoisseur and that's one of your creative outlets, we're not saying that that's a bad thing. We're just here to talk about those things that we do that are actually not really driving us towards where we really want to be.
Yeah. And I think, for me, looking at alcohol in my life, I mean, I don't drink very much. During a celebration, maybe I'll have a few drinks, but usually my behavior with alcohol has been like maybe a drink at the end of my day, right? Maybe a glass of wine or maybe a beer. And lately, I've just been having this like sense of like, I don't really want that. And so I've been kind of tuning into that, like, why? Because there have been times in my life where I've been like, I don't feel like I should be drinking right now, or it's not really serving me. Like I've had that inclination before and I've stopped, but it's felt more like I was restricting myself. Like I'd be like, oh, I really want that, but I can't have that because I said I'm not going to have that, right? So it felt like, almost like when you go on a diet and you're like, oh, that piece of chocolate cake looks really good, but I can't have it because I'm not eating sugar right now. Like it comes from a place of restriction. And I think what's different about where I'm at right now is that I'm approaching this more from a place of curiosity, which I've kind of never done before. And what's been cool about it, and kind of what we were talking about earlier, is that instead of looking at like, oh no, I don't want that glass of wine because I said I wasn't going to drink, I'm saying, why do I want that glass of wine?
Mhm.
And I'm still allowing myself permission to have it but I'm like, hey, I'm going to explore the reason behind it first. And in the exploring the reason behind it, I talk myself out of it every time. And so it's just been really a different way to approach this behavior that wasn't necessarily serving me. And, when I'm exploring, like, why do I want this glass of wine? I've just noticed it's like, I'm feeling tired, or I'm trying to cope with anxiety or stress that's come up throughout the day, or I'm trying to relax quickly, or sometimes it's like I just want something that tastes really good and it's like I want to treat myself. Um or I notice the story a lot of the time of like, oh, well, it was a long day with the kids, like I deserve this, or I deserve this thing for me, which I'm recognizing is like a lot of cultural conditioning, right? That doesn't actually come from how I really feel. And so, in just noticing, like, okay, what's my reasoning behind wanting it? Like, what's motivating this desire? I'm actually identifying, oh, there's a need here that is driving this craving. And it's either like, I need rest or I'm bored and I like want something that tastes good, right? As something to do. And then I'm kind of asking myself, okay, so if I have a glass of wine, I'm like playing it through in my head. After I have a glass of wine, about an hour later, I'm going to feel really tired again. And it still is an hour till bedtime, So now I'm going to be battling exhaustion or battling this fatigue even harder. And then I'm not going to sleep as well. And then I'm going to have some brain fog tomorrow because I didn't sleep super well, or I have two small children. I have no idea if they're going to keep me up all night. And I'm going to be really cranky if I also had a glass of wine and I was trying to, have that like hard alcohol sleep. And so I've just like been playing out the kind of like how this affects the outcome. And every time I play it out, I'm like, it's not worth it. It's so not worth it. I want to have energy. I want to be focused tomorrow. I want to be able to have my brain work the way that I really want it to work. And like, why would I add another obstacle in that? So it's just been a different way to approach this that I haven't really ever,
Mhm.
approached it like that before.
Yeah. Yeah. And for my reflection, I think both Julie and I have not necessarily suffered from any serious addiction, but we've had people in our lives that have. And I think it also is, it has kind of woken us up to that desire to be more aware of our own. And I think that happens for some of us. I've certainly have had clients that have had a partner that was suffering from an alcohol addiction or a, over the counter drug addiction, or just things that are kind of simple to get. And a lot of times I think sometimes we just join that person because we don't really know how to handle it. And so for both of us, we've just been reflecting on that piece. And for me right now, I'm looking at a couple things that are kind of normal. One is just coming, ending my day and getting on and watching a show. And so I've been really asking myself, what is it what do I really need? And it reminded me of a book I read a long time ago called No Ordinary Moments from Dan Millman. And if you've never read a Dan Millman book, you should absolutely pick one up. He's amazing. He's been around for quite a while. And I think I picked up one of his first books when I was 23. So he's been around for a minute. But in his book, No Ordinary Moments, he has a whole chapter on addiction. And it reminded me, as I'm starting to look at my habits, of why do I feel like I need to watch TV every night? And then the other habit that I'm working on is titrating off of a sleep med that I started several years ago, post-divorce, post-cancer, through a highly stressful time in my life of kind of single parenting and creating a career and all of those things that can happen in midlife. And it's only now that I'm starting to come to the place of realizing that I created some strategies around sleep that aren't super healthy, and really, I don't really want to take this all the way for the rest of my life. So I'm really looking at that piece. And a lot of times when we're starting to unpack maybe a habit or an addiction, it starts to show us where maybe we stopped growing somewhere along the line, and we brought this thing in as a stress kind of tactic, or how to deal with stress.
I mean, it's a Band-Aid, really.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And so for me, that sleep med was, yep, taking care of it. Now I can sleep. And so it was the quick fix, to
Which
that
was
sleep.
necessary at the time. There's no shame in needing
No.
medication to get you through
A tough time. It's just
tough
then
time.
I continued I continued that strategy for a really long time. And what I love about how Dan Millman frames it is he calls these addictions, and they can be, a variety of things, including sex addiction or technology addiction, whatever that is. He calls them the gateways of stress. And so it's what I have acknowledged to myself is, why do I want to sit in front of the TV? I want to disconnect and I want to de-stress. But what I've noticed is it really actually doesn't do that. It's fun and I like watching a great show, but that is not actually a strategy for de-stressing. And so I think that's really kind of the conversation you and I have been having, Julie, about what actually is it that we need, that we're supplicating with something outside of ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I think often that need is tied to pain too. So it's like, what is the underlying need, and not having that need met is causing a certain amount of pain. And I mean, it does not necessarily physical pain, sometimes maybe, yeah. But it's like, there's this pain that's happening in our life, and maybe it's like the pain of not feeling like you're making an impact on the world, or maybe it's the pain of feeling stuck, or it's the pain of wanting more money and not knowing how to manifest it, or feeling like what you're doing isn't working. Like, there's so many different levels of pain. And I think all of these behaviors it's just a strategy that we've learned and had reinforced over and over and over again to be a really quick fix, or really it's a distraction, or a Band-Aid like Ambien, and it's like no, by doing that, we're not ever addressing what the pain is. And so then the pain gets louder and louder and louder. And so then we end up with more habits to distract or feel comfortable or feel safe. And I think, you know, like a lot of our addictions are linked into routines or rituals. Like if we think about somebody who's a smoker, it's like they have usually a ritual around when they smoke, you know, maybe it's their first cigarette of the day, or it's like, or vaping, like maybe, or even smoking weed, like when they get home and, you know, you're using this as a tool to relax. It's just, I think it's really because we haven't developed another strategy that works as quickly and as efficiently as the substance, or as, you know, the television, or whatever it is. So I don't think there's any shame in saying this is my strategy. I think it's just like we're we have inadequate tools to deal with our stress and our pain, right?
Yeah. And I also think some of it is we're just trying to escape ourselves, or we're trying to escape some sort of pain. And that can be emotional pain. It can be a lot. I know that I have times in my life where I just wanted to shut everything down. And so I wanted a substance to like take me away from where I was and what my reality was. And I think a lot of people do that. And it really takes a lot of bravery and courage to start looking at what's the hole that I'm trying to fill with this thing over here. Because a lot of times it is distraction. We don't really want to be where we're at, or we don't
Yeah.
know how to be where we're at. And that is really painful. And, you know, a lot of the conversations we end up having with each other is really identifying what that is. So now we can start to address it rather than repress it, or, you know, avoid it, or just perpetuate the cycle. And I can say that addiction can also be, we can be addicted to safety, like things staying the same,
Yeah.
or controlling situations, or we can even be addicted to our stress or the drama. And Julie, do you kind of want to explain, like, why does our brain do that?
Yeah. So if this is something you're interested in looking at, I would highly recommend reading the book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Joe Dispenza. He goes so deep in this work, and he's done like an insane amount of research and brain scans. And like, he just has a wide depth of information on the topic. And he does such a great, I mean, it's a very it's a dense book, but I do think he does a great job of making it somewhat approachable if you don't have a neuroscience degree. But I mean, really what's happening is like we have cells in our, you know, we have cells in our brain that get conditioned to a certain brain chemistry. And so if you have gone through a period of life where it's very stressful and you're like fighting to survive, or maybe you're not fighting to survive, but your nervous system's in a state of like fight or flight, and so you're very much, your body is interpreting it as you're fighting to survive, then your brain actually, like the cells in your brain, modify themselves to need those stress chemicals to feel a state of homeostasis. So that what will happen is, even when all of the external stress, like when the external circumstances are no longer that survival, like, so, I mean, I see this with clients all the time, where I have had conversations with people where they're like, I used to have to fight to like keep food on the table, and now I'm making six figures and I still feel like I'm not safe. And I still feel the same exact way that I felt when that was happening. It's because your chemistry changed to need that. So then you start to create circumstances in your life that give you the same hit of adrenaline, or you get like, I've seen people who are like so addicted to stress or so addicted to drama that they like go around creating dramatic situations with all kinds of people, and like wild shit happens to them, where I'm like, that doesn't happen to other people. Like, you realize you're the one creating this, right? But it's because their brain chemistry is literally telling them, I need this to survive. And so when that's happening inside your brain, you're going to subconsciously make choices or create behaviors or create situations or put yourself in situations where you still keep experiencing those same traumas, or the same chemical of emotions over and over and over again. And what's cool about this is, when you're aware of it you can use it to your advantage also. So you can, and that's the work that Joe Dispenza really does. And I think it's phenomenal. It's changing your neuroplasticity and changing how your neurons are firing together and wiring together, as he says. But you can use it to your advantage, and you can start putting yourself in feel good feeling states, right? Good feeling states, and starting to change the makeup of your cells that way. And so you can kind of reverse engineer it. But I think this is like the core of what's happening in so many people's lives. And I think really, like, one of my clients this week brought up the addiction to safety, and was just like, can you guys talk about that a little bit? And I think that's the core of what's happening, is your brain is wanting to keep you safe because in some way you felt really unsafe, or you felt really out of control. And I think about my, like, raising toddlers. If you've ever had toddlers, or if you've ever raised children, you know that, like, a routine creates safety for small humans. So, like, if you're having a lot of tantrums with your kids, the advice is usually to create more consistent structures so that they feel safe, so because they can predict what's going to happen next in their day. And so the tantrum is like the symptom of feeling really out of control. And I think we do this as adults, like we create these rituals and routines to feel a sense of control and to feel a sense of safety and comfort. But what's different about an adult and a child is that a child has almost like a lower level of consciousness, where they don't have the ability to control their thoughts like we do. And so we end up living in a more primitive state as adults, saying, oh no, I'm still a victim to my circumstances. I don't have any control over this. So I have to control everything about my environment, and I have to have these routines, and I have to have a drink at this time, and a TV show at this time, or all kinds of crazy things. I need to have the house set at this exact temperature. Like, we control everything in our external environment to feel safe, when really all we have to do is change our thinking to feel safe. And we are creative beings. We have that potential. And I don't think that anybody is going around saying, I want to be addicted to cigarettes, or I want to be addicted to alcohol, or I want to be addicted to sugar. I think we're just addicted to those things because we don't know a better way. We don't have an awareness of how to create a feeling of relaxation as quickly as a glass of wine does, right?
Yeah.
So we use these to stay safe, to stay comfortable, and we kind of further perpetuate the underlying pains that we have, right?
So then when we try to create change, or we try to get, uncomfortable, then, we kind of sabotage ourselves, because we just want to go back to that set point. Like, no, I felt comfortable over here. I just want this over here.
But
So
we're doing that in a way, like, we're not conscious that we're self-sabotaging. Our brain is literally like, no, that's super scary. Don't do it that way. We're going to create this other circumstance over here to keep your brain chemistry where we know that it should be.
Yeah. And this just comes from our, when I studied Kundalini yoga, and the concept was, in that ideology, is that there's positive, negative, and neutral brain. And I kind of loved it because it explained positive brain is that brain that's always looking for opportunities and super excited about, oh, that new thing that I'm going to try over there. And negative brain is on the side of trying to keep us safe and having us be discerning and making sure we're looking at all the facts of the situation. And then neutral mind basically is the combination of the two. And I think many of us just get into negative thinking, negative mind, because we're always looking for the thing. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with clients who've said, I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And it's like, there is no shoe, so I think it's helpful for us to
creating the shoe.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's helpful for us to accept that this is just part of being human. It's not bad for us to be discerning about situations. But if your whole life is being driven by negative thinking and a negative mind that is always trying to keep you safe, then you're only going to stay in a lower state of consciousness. You're not going to be able to shift into a different awareness and ability to change those addictive habits and to change the outcomes and truly the things that you desire to have in life.
Yeah. That makes me think of just like how living in a state of addiction keeps you kind of stuck at a certain like vibrational frequency, or like you just said, like level of consciousness. Like if you've ever walked into somebody's home who's like really deep in an addiction, it feels really heavy. Like
Yeah.
you're like, oh God, right? You can feel it. Or if you've ever been like, I used to live in Boulder, Colorado, and there was like one strip downtown where it was like, a lot of transient folk living there. And you could just tell like there's a lot of addiction and homelessness. And like when you'd walk through that path, I remember feeling like, oh, like an elephant sitting on my chest, right? And I do think like we feel that heaviness. What we're feeling is like truly a vibrational heaviness. There's, the universal laws. One is the law of vibration. And this kind of explains the different levels of consciousness, but also that everything is we're all vibrational beings. Every single thing you see in your whole world is vibrating at a certain frequency. If you look at it under a microscope, you'll see a different level of vibration. The denser it is, the slower the particles are moving, and the stronger the microscope you probably need to see them. But everything's vibrating all the time. And I think when you're in a higher state of consciousness, or you're in, closer to like in Kundalini, call it more like a divine or cosmic state, you're at a really high vibrational frequency where you feel really light, and you feel really, I don't know, there isn't that heaviness. And so I think also just using that as a tool to assess in yourself, like if you're feeling really heavy and sluggish and fatigued, and you're struggling with these coping mechanisms, like you're actually in a lower vibrational state. And part of shifting that is becoming aware of it and starting to become aware of when you feel lighter. And I think, I see this all the time when somebody all of a sudden has some sort of kind of an awakening in their life, and you see them start thriving more, and maybe they're like choosing healthier habits, or they're just making profound shifts in their lives. Oftentimes you see the weight just like fall off of them. And people are like, how did she lose so much weight? And she's like, I'm happy. Like that's how it is. But it's like, heaviness, denseness, lower vibration, it binds together. So again, if you are in a lower vibrational frequency, you're going to choose lower vibrational frequency coping mechanisms, which are going to add density to you as a being. You're going to feel heavier, you're going to feel more sluggish. So I think just like being aware of all of these things and starting to develop an awareness of these things is 100% the first step to making changes in this area, right?
Yeah. And I will just say that when it comes to raising your awareness and raising your level of consciousness, this isn't about it's not about your intellect. There are a lot of people that are super smart, but not connected to themselves and aware of really what they're thinking, what they're feeling. And so I would just say that can be a misconception of like, super smart people know all this stuff. It really doesn't come from that space. I mean, it's great to be, highly intelligent, but this is really a whole different part of ourselves that we don't really talk about in our culture. We don't really cultivate this. This is why we have meditation and mindfulness and folks that are out teaching this. This is where we come from, some spiritual practices, where some of this information lies. And, a lot of us don't really have faith in ourselves. And when we start to have that faith, then it starts to become easier to increase your awareness around what is happening with you. And that has to include the whole body. So it isn't just coming from thoughts. It's like you've got to integrate this into your whole self. So when you become aware, you can start to ask yourself, what is this thing? Where is it in my body? What color does it have? And we have to start like really going in and exploring it on so many different levels. And this is where I really appreciate the times that we live in, because there's so many tools for this. But at the same time as how many tools we also have a million distractions. So it really takes the desire within yourself to really explore this piece and really make time to create that kind of change in your life and be able to ask yourself, what do I need? So when I ask myself, when I want to go watch a television show, it's like, then I start asking myself, what do I need? I need to release my day. I need to release the energy that I built from all the busyness of my day. I actually need to be with myself, and getting on a show and getting into somebody else's drama and their story, well, that's fun, is actually not assisting me in what I really need in that moment. So that's just an example of like how my awareness around realizing that when I watch TV, it just disconnects me and then I go to bed. That's not really the greatest solution for also me coming off sleep meds. Like I actually need to unwind all of that stuff. So then when I go to sleep, I'm not actually needing to take a pill that's just going to knock me out and just
Yeah.
circumvent all that stress.
Yeah, I think we can also acknowledge that like when we have stress happening or anxiety happening, or, you know, this too is just energy, and energy has to express itself. And the only way that that energy has, like mental energy has to, the only vehicle it has is our bodies. And so by taking ourselves offline through with a substance or with numbing to a TV show, we're not actually giving that energy anywhere to go. So then it does end up often manifesting as a physical ailment. Like if you think of anxiety, worry, fear, these are mental states of dis-ease, right? So if the body is the physical or is the only way that it can manifest or process through, then it's going to turn into dis-ease in the body, right? So, I mean, there are tons and tons of people out there studying this sort of thing where it's like, you know, people who have arthritis, it's like anger stored in the body, or people who have stomach ulcers, it's like worry, like constant worry that they've lived with for years and years and years. Like, I think we're getting to a point in our culture where we're starting to acknowledge that the mind and body are not separate. This is one and the same. And anxiety is just mental energy that hasn't had somewhere else to go. And so it's, you know, so exercising, like getting the energy out of the body, out of the mind, can be really helpful. Moving your body, doing some yoga, doing breath work, like breathing, like get the energy out, right? Like these things are much more effective and actually addressing the root cause of what we're after when we're searching for a quick fix, right?
Yeah. And kind of like Dan Millman says, is that, you know, then we're creating different gateways. So we're not going to that gateway for our managing our stress. We're actually creating a different gateway. And those different gateways then can become, you know, better habits. And, you know, sometimes we just have to walk ourselves. We actually are not saying just quit all of this stuff. We're actually going to say reach for the easiest thing you can do. You know, so an example is I have a client who every night she gets home, her and her husband sit outside, even in the winter, you know, they have like a heat lamp and they have a cocktail and they smoke. And, you know, we were just talking about her health and some of her challenges. And so one of the easiest things she thought of doing was buying some really lovely mocktails and having them in her fridge and still pouring it in her normal glass that she drinks her wine or her cocktail out of. And so, you know, is that going to be easy for her? Probably not, but it's the easiest thing to reach. And that's kind of what we're also talking about too, is for me, I'm not cutting myself off from a television show, but I am, before I I even indulge in that, I am doing some breath work. I am moving. I'm actually asking myself, what do I need right now? It might be a hot bath. And then I might still go do that thing. But now I know I've managed my stress.
Yeah.
I'm not going cold turkey off of my sleep med. I'm titrating down. So, these are also the things we want you to walk away from. We're not just telling you quit, cut it all off, because you don't have a strategy yet.
But
So
also, Mom, to back up, like, if you don't mind talking about this, you going off your sleep meds, you called me a couple of weeks ago and you were like, I'm really struggling with this and I don't know why I'm struggling with it. And so then that started the kind of like we talked about, like building awareness around like, why is this so challenging? And you started to get really curious about it. And maybe you can kind of talk about like what you actually realized was going on and what it was maybe connected to.
Oh, yeah. I think I know what you're asking me. So I feel like sometimes we create an addiction or a strategy that we're dealing with something from maybe a long time ago. And so for me, I started realizing that part of why this was becoming hard is because there was a part of, I sometimes call it arrested development. There was a part of me that stopped solving a problem when I started taking these sleep meds. So I was kind of unraveling myself at about 10 plus years ago, and realizing that stuff was arising, and I needed to spend some time like journaling and emotionally just looking at where was I when I started this, because it was a strategy to solve a problem that I really didn't solve. So it's arising now, and in my awareness now, I'm understanding that that's part of my process, and there's nothing right or wrong about that. Is that kind of what you were
Yeah,
thinking?
I think it just was like, you were really discovering, oh, there was some pain here that I wasn't, you didn't have at the time. You did not have the resources to deal with the pain. Like it was too much, and you had to get food on the table. You had to watch after me and my sister. You had to, like, you were in a much more of a survival state, and you were making it happen, right? And it was like, your pain kind of took a back burner to filling these lower, like on Maslow's hierarchy, the lower needs, like the bottom of the pyramid needs,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so that pain got put down, like compartmentalized, put away. And then it was like, by continuing on the sleep medication for 10 years, you never had to open that box.
Yeah.
And so now tapering off, it's like the box is opening up and you're like, oh shit, there's all this stuff from 10 years ago.
10 years ago that I just
that I never dealt
conveniently,
with.
yeah. And I think that is also what arises when we start to create new habits, and I think it's just so central that we have to have compassion and love for ourselves to even endeavor these changes in our life. Like that has to be a foundation, which is not usually. Sometimes we're really mean to ourselves when we're like, I got to stop drinking wine, I'm in, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
And it makes it even harder, because it doesn't work to be mean to yourself to change something that's happening. It really has to come from, because you'll just have the same result. I guarantee you'll have the same result, because I did it again and again and again throughout my 40s. I would just kept beating myself up for the things that I wasn't doing right. But then the change really happened as I started to realize I had to love and accept where I was and develop my awareness as to why these things were happening to begin with.
Yeah. I think it's when I got a certification as a health coach. When I first started out in coaching, I thought, oh, I'm going to do health coaching, but then realized that what's behind health coaching is life coaching. So here we are. But there was this concept that we talked about a lot that was called crowding out. And it was basically like, if somebody's trying to change a habit in regards to their eating or their nutrition, instead of saying, I'm going to restrict gluten and eggs and dairy and all these things, it was, I'm going to crowd them out by adding in so many of these other great things. So it was like, I'm going to crowd out drinking Diet Coke by crowding in drinking, 2 gallons of water every day. And it's like, you kind of just, you add in so much of the positive things that you like stop making space for the unsupportive things. And I think, oh, I forgot where I was going with this. Where was my train of thought?
Just crowding out behaviors, I think.
Oh
Or
yeah, and so I think I really love that concept in curbing any sort of behavior. Is like it's so much easier than to be in restriction. Like restriction doesn't feel good. It doesn't
no.
work. Like it'll work for a temporary period of time, but that's where you see somebody like, oh, do a really restrictive diet and then gain all this weight back as soon as they're off the diet. Or like anytime you've restricted anything in your life, then you at some point end up swinging way far the other direction. It's like this like bipolar behavior that you have going on. And so I love the idea of just crowding in the things you want, which is kind of what I've been doing with, you know, my own experience of drinking alcohol. Is I like went and bought all these other like really delicious beverages. And so I'm like, there's literally no reason that I can say, oh, I just want something good that's like, I'm sick of drinking water, I'm going to have a glass of wine or something like that. It's like, no, you have all these other options that are healthy, full of adaptogens and, you know, health benefiting
Yeah.
cocktails and things like that. And so it's like, oh, I'm, you know, starting to crowd out this behavior. But I don't think still, even with that strategy, I don't think it works unless you're really developing the awareness of what the underlying needs are and where that underlying pain is, because that pain will not go away until you look at it square in the face and express it and feel it and address it.
And yeah, and make a decision to get really curious about that and follow the thread of what that thing is telling you, what you can do about it. And like I said, it doesn't have to be like a super drastic thing unless you're really somebody who really needs a super drastic thing, which, you know, both Julie and I have seen that in our lives with others. And, you know, that is a person that is really needing some outside support. And if you know somebody like that, that's really the best thing to do, is to get the right support for them. But for most of us, we're just dealing with these kind of normal daily life addictions. I mean, you know, one that I think is really hard for many of us right now is scrolling, is being on our phones, because we're getting dopamine hits. So if you're just getting dopamine hits from your phone and you're not getting it from other things, it just becomes very easy to get into a habit of that. I have so many clients that scroll in bed at night. And it's just because they're just trying to feel good. So there's just a million different ways that this can play out. We just wanted to open this conversation today as a way for maybe you to investigate if your habits or your addictions are getting in the way of you being aligned in your life and really being on purpose, then these are really good things to take a look at. And like I said, start looking at books, send us messages on, you know, some recommendations if you really know what you're struggling with.
Yeah, I think awareness is 100% the first step, and curiosity, and really just investigating what's there and starting to look at that. And that's kind of the beauty of life coaching. A lot of what we do is like come in and start looking at like, why why am I this way? And I think, Mom, maybe you've used this term before, but it's like you're going in and, oh, you say it like you're a detective, right? You're like coming in with a flashlight, pulling all the shit out of the closet, really looking at all of these things, and then being really intentional about what goes back into the closet and having it organized in a nice way.
It's being able to take a look at those things, maybe those dark things, you know, that are too scary to look at. And that's why you have an addiction. So sometimes it's really helpful to have the support if somebody can walk in a loving manner, who's not going to come in and go, why the hell did you do that? It's just somebody's going to walk in and say, that's there. Let's be curious about why that's there. And then let's figure out what we're going to do to solve that. So you no longer have the burden of all this shit that's sitting in your closet that you don't need. Or it's getting in the way of you really seeing who you truly are, because really who you truly are is really right there. So I think a lot of times we have the perception that, oh my God, I got to do so much work to discover myself. And it really can be pretty simple if you just start practicing awareness and seeing the areas that you could pivot And
Yeah.
sometimes it's just moving this further over here. It doesn't have to be a super huge, drastic life change. Sometimes it is because we backed ourselves into the wall, and maybe we're in a marriage for 15 years with someone who's an alcoholic, who's clearly not going to change. And that creates a situation where lots of change is happening. And other times it's just simple things where it's like, I'm doing pretty well, but I'm just noticing I'm super tired, so
Yeah.
it can be a huge range.
Yeah. I had a client just last week who had she had built up in her head like all these ideas of like what was going wrong in her business. And we kind of teased them out for a half hour and she realized like, oh, all the things I thought were the problem, actually I'm doing really well at those. And there were just like a couple really small tweaks that needed to happen to make things flow and feel a little bit more in alignment for her. And it's like she had made it this huge thing in her head. And after our coaching call, she's like, okay, I have a plan. I have action steps. This is like super doable. This isn't overwhelming anymore. And sometimes it's just like, we are so dramatic in our heads. Like we're so dramatic. Like I'm guilty of this. I do it all the time. I like am very dramatic about something. And then like 2 days later, I'm like, once we've talked it out or you've, coached me a little bit, I'm like, oh, what was I even like so spun out about? That's like not even an issue anymore. And I think like we all tend to do this where we create this thought bubble that now has all this. I mean, when we have a thought, when we think a thought, we create a belief, right? If we've been thinking this thought over and over again, and any thought that we have, like our brain is trying to look for evidence to support it. So then we make it bigger by having all these like supporting, thoughts that come and join it. Like it's like our thoughts have buddies that then show up and they're like, yeah, that's the right thought. And sometimes all you have to do is just think a different thought, but it's really hard to do that on your own. It's really hard to make those changes on your own. I think that's where it can be so helpful just to talk things out with a friend or a coach or a therapist or somebody else who can just be a really neutral third party to say, let's get curious about that thought. Like, why do we have that? What's driving that? Is there pain behind it? Is it social conditioning that's behind it? Is it just something you picked up that's not even yours that you can let go of and just be done with? Because sometimes that's the case. Like sometimes it's as easy as just being like, oh, that actually came from my parents and that has nothing to do with me and I can just be done with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And also if you're struggling with addiction, look at who you're hanging out with too. Because really, if you're trying to increase your awareness, you want to hang out with people who have awareness. If you're hanging out with people that are definitely not aware and have perpetuating stories that you hear again and again and again, it might be time for you to take a look at who you're hanging out with.
Yeah.
That can be, kind of a challenging thing. Like, oh my God, I'm not hanging out with anyone who has awareness, and that is perpetuating my addiction. That also is a helpful thing to take a look at too, because if you're hanging around with people who are more aware and more curious and more grounded, and you notice that they're a little bit happier or they have some great insights, this is what we want to attract in our lives. And that can also be helpful. And that's why I know sometimes when people go into rehab programs, they get in an environment where people have a higher awareness and understanding of why you're having that challenge, and then the appropriate support is given. And this is just, a lot of us are just running through this life without the appropriate support. And I just want to suggest that also can be a tactic for you to look at. Who are you hanging out with?
Yeah, I think when I look at my own life, it's like anytime I've had, like, I would say the biggest, like most pivotal moments of change in my life have been when I've done kind of an audit of who I was around. And like I kind of referenced at the beginning, I was in this relationship with an addict and it got really ugly at the end. And I remember I had this, so this was 10 years ago in like February of this year. So I've been thinking about this because I'm like, oh, I'm coming up on a decade of that. And like in some ways that feels like that was like lifetimes ago. And in some ways I'm like, it's only been 10 years. So it's kind of just, my experience of time, I feel like is kind of weird anyway. But sometimes you're just like, wow, that was only 10 years ago. That's crazy how many lives I feel like I've lived since then. But I remember sitting on the curb with two friends at like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I had like removed myself from the situation that was happening inside my household. And they just looked at me and they were like, Julie, what the fuck are you doing? Like, what are you doing? Like, for them, they were just like, this is so clear. You are not the same it's not, you're
Why are
not
you?
in the addiction. You are not the addict. Like, why are you, living in this situation? Why are you in this relationship still? Like, it was so confusing to them. And that moment was like pivotal for me to be like, you're right. Like, what am I doing? And I feel like it was the first time that somebody had helped me question and helped me get curious. And in a sense, I was thinking about these two people who did that. I don't even think they probably remember that. Maybe they do. But I was thinking like, man, I don't think they realized how much they changed my life that evening. But it was like, I don't know, maybe the next day I was like, I'm leaving this relationship, and I packed up my stuff and I left, and it was really, really scary. And it was really, really difficult. And I remember thinking for probably 2 years before that point, I had this whole list of reasons why I couldn't leave this person. And some of them were that I didn't believe in my ability to like provide for myself without this person. Some of them were like, I was afraid that this person might not keep living if I wasn't there helping keep them alive. And so there were a lot of fears that I had that kept me stuck in this situation. But I think it was just like this quick moment of questioning that it was like, oh, this whole thing opened up. And as soon as I changed as soon as I made the decision, it was like I bumped myself up into a higher vibrational state. And then all of these solutions came flooding in that I could never see. The 2 years leading up to that point, I knew I needed to be out of this relationship. I knew this was not a good situation, but I could not see any sort of solution because I was stuck at this lower vibrational state where the only things that I was attracting were things that were keeping me there. And then as soon as I made this decision, it was like I ended up living with two phenomenal humans, like that I met on Craigslist. And then I ended up meeting my husband not that long after. It was like I bumped my vibration back up to who Julie is. And then I attracted all of these amazing people into my life, and my life profoundly changed. And I think like, when I've made changes more recently too, and just been more discerning about who's in my life and who I'm allowing to be in my energetic and who I'm allowing to be in my space, it was so many changes for the positive have happened as well. And on an energetic level, I'm like, oh, I have far more creativity, and I have far more energy to be the parent that I want to be and be the wife that I want to be and show up and give and serve in the ways that I want to. And so I just think sometimes we don't realize how the people we're surrounding ourselves with are holding us down. And like, it's okay to not know what the solution is. Sometimes all you have to do is just make that one first choice of like, I'm going to ask for help from an outside party, and then they will help you raise your energy level where you then can be more resourceful and find solutions. So I think a lot of us just get stuck in that feeling of like, I don't know how. I don't know the how of how I'm going to get out of this relationship, or I don't know the how of how I'm going to deal with this addiction. But you don't need to know the how. You just have to make the decision. You have to figure out where you're going, and then start going.
Yeah. And amazingly enough, that kind of support does arrive. You just have to make the decision that you're going to reach out for that.
Yeah.
That you're for that perspective. And it doesn't mean you have to discard everybody in your life, because I mean, I have people in my life that have addictions. They're family members and I love them, and that's not my job to do anything about it. It's just my job to accept where they're at, but I don't have to match that energy. I can still be in my state and still be supportive and still be loving. So I
It's
think
not
there's
about fixing anyone around you.
no, it is never about fixing anyone.
You can't.
No, nope. I wouldn't recommend that you try to control everything outside of you. I actually recommend you go inward and figure yourself out. And the only way to do that is just to increase your awareness, and to increase your compassion for yourself and why you arrived here and how you're here. It's okay. It's never too late to
Yeah.
change, ever.
And
So,
there's just, I mean, I think like our stories are not rare. Like most of us interact with people with addictions, have our own addictions. Like, I just want to say, you know, this is not something that we should be judgmental of at all. And honestly, it's what's going on for a lot of people, whether or not you see it. And so if this is you, or if this resonates with you, just to like give yourself love and compassion and be like, this doesn't mean anything about you. Like, this does not mean, it has nothing to do with your intellect. It has nothing to do with your worthiness. It has nothing to do with who you are on a deeper level. This is just sometimes a habit that's been created and reinforced. And it's kind of just a lack of an awareness of how to do it differently. And that is totally changeable.
mhm. Yeah, I'm not going to say it's always easy.
Yeah, no.
Going through a whole sleep thing, of shifting something. But my vision is that it's ultimately in the best, is the best interest of myself and my goals. And my goals are to have a highly functioning brain. And so all of that is being reworked and rewired. And, but I have a dedication to it because of the love that I have for myself and the desire that I have to really be the best version of myself. Because, for me, I just view this is my one life in this incarnation, and I want to do the best I can do, but not from a sense of achieving, from a sense of showing up whole and showing up the best version of myself.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, that's ultimately what gets you through it, right? Is that vision of you in the future. And I think that's, I mean, bringing it back to the beginning of this conversation, like that's my driving motivation also to curb this behavior in myself, is just like, I'm like, how does next, we talk about this with our clients all the time. They'll laugh if they're watching this, but we talk about like, how is next level Julie living her life? How is next level Sandra living her life? This is like, we're such nerds. This is like our conversation all the time on the phone with each other. We're like, we talk about ourselves in third person, and we're like, next level Julie doesn't do that. But I'm like, next level Julie has this like, this really sharp brain that, and you too, like, we want quick processing. We want to be able to take in a lot of information and integrate it quickly and live our purpose, live our design, and show up in service. And does being really extra tired from having one glass of wine the night before serve that vision for myself? Not really.
Yeah.
And like, I have permission to change that. And like, sometimes I might be like, well, next level Julie also loves to go out and have a beautiful date with her husband, and she's probably going to have a beautiful glass of wine to go with the beautiful dish of food that she's eating. And that's cool too.
Yeah.
Both can exist at the same time. It doesn't have to be this black or white thing, for me at least. But I think just looking at like, what is that vision for yourself, and do these behaviors align with that? Because when we start looking at what we want to become and who we want to be, I think the motivation becomes much stronger, and the persistence to keep titrating off the sleep medication, or the persistence to develop healthier behaviors, is there, and it's easier to sustain.
Yeah. And I think there also that increases our confidence in ourselves that we can tackle something like that. I mean, I am married to somebody who hasn't drank in 8 or 9 years. And that was just a choice because it wasn't a healthy choice. And there's a lot of pride in that and a lot of confidence in that, and also a desire not to change that. So many of us who, are embracing sobriety, that also it shows us that we can tackle other things too. That's a hard thing to do. So I just wanted to call that out too, that some people just have to abstain from that behavior because it's a slippery slope, right?
Mhm.
So we're all
But
in
again,
different.
it doesn't align with Zane's vision
Yes.
of who he wants to be.
No,
Like,
no, yeah.
so that's what motivates him every day to like continue
Yeah.
to make that decision, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's a meditation teacher and a mindfulness teacher. And I mean, does that really align? Like, I mean, there are a lot of Buddhist Rinpoches and stuff out there that were amazing and they drank, but
They loved their alcohol.
yeah, I know, but they, actually it really didn't serve what they were, what they were doing. But I mean, so all these things can
We're
coexist.
all human. We're not immune. No one's immune to it. Doesn't matter
Yeah,
your level of
I know.
intellect or
Guru, yeah, guru level.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So hopefully our conversation today inspired you or got you thinking. And if anything, it just maybe showed you our humanness and the struggles that we have. We just like to be totally transparent. That's part of our values here and what we're doing on this podcast. And hopefully today, you got a few nuggets of information or inspiration to take a look at those things that maybe you want to increase your awareness around.
Yeah, and if you need support, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'll always put the contact information in the podcast description. And we're here to support you or to guide you in a direction of someone who can support you if we are not currently qualified to help you if you're struggling with addiction or something like that. So
Awesome.
Thanks for tuning in today. We'll be back next week.
Thanks. Bye.